Hello and welcome to our brand new show, Firstpost Spotlight, where we bring you the stories that matter to you from all across the world. From breaking news to the day's biggest controversies, we shed light on issues that shape our world. I'm Alison Lagrange, live from Durban, South Africa. Let's begin with the top headlines. Qatar hands Israel and Hamas a final draft of ceasefire and hostage release agreement designed to end the war as officials express optimism about a breakthrough. Sweden sends warships to the Baltic Sea for the first time as part of increased surveillance efforts amid a spate of suspected sabotage of undersea cables. Japan, the Philippines and the United States vow to further deepen cooperation under a trilateral arrangement in the face of rising tensions with China in the Indo-Pacific. Taiwan's National Security Bureau flags a significant increase in suspected Chinese espionage, saying arrests rose by a third to 64 in 2024. And Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurates the strategic Zimur Tunnel in Jammu and Kashmir, making the tourist resort town of Sonamarg accessible all year long. Hello and welcome. We begin with the fallout of the war raging in the heart of Europe between Russia and Ukraine and its impact on the global oil trade. The war, which is just days away from its 3-year mark, has brought Cold War rivals, Russia and the United States, to the edge of a direct conflict. In the latest, the United States has imposed its harshest sanctions yet on Russia's oil industry. 2 major Russian oil producers, along with 183 vessels that have shipped Russian oil, have been hit with severe sanctions. The move is aimed at targeting Moscow's revenues that it uses to fund its war with Ukraine.
They will have profound effect on the growth of the Russian economy and make it more difficult for Putin to conduct his wars. It is probable that gas prices could increase as much as 3-4 cents a gallon. But what's going to have a more profound impact on Russia's ability to continue to act in the way it's acting in the conduct of war. Putin's in tough shape right now. And I think it's really important that he not have any breathing room to continue to do the god-awful things he's continuing to do. And as I said, he's got his own problems economically, significant problems economically, as well as politically at home.
Not just Russia, these sanctions are also expected to directly impact Moscow's top oil customers, India and China. Beijing is the world's largest oil importer, and New Delhi ranks third. The newly sanctioned tankers handled over 530 million barrels of Russian crude oil in 2024, about 42% of the country's total seaborne crude exports. Out of these, around 300 million barrels were shipped to China, adding up to roughly 61% of China's seaborne imports of Russian oil. And the bulk of the remainder went to India. Now, India relies on Russia for about a third of its oil imports. For the first 11 months of last year, India's Russian crude imports rose 4.5% on year to 1.7 million barrels per day. This makes up 36% of India's total imports. For China, the volume including pipeline supply was up 2% at 2.1 million barrels per day, which is about 20% of its total imports. Since Moscow's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Russia began diverting oil and fuel shipments from Europe to Asia, and both India and China have been the main beneficiaries of discounted Russian crude. But a step up in punitive measures, including sanctions targeting Russian producers, insurers and vessels, has thrown the trade of discounted crude into disarray. Now, these tougher sanctions on Russian oil will force Indian and Chinese refiners to diversify and to source more from the Middle East, Africa and the Americas. In December, India's crude oil imports from West Asia, specifically Iraq and the United Arab Emirates, surged, New Delhi is already looking to replace the shortfall in supplies from its largest source market, Russia. In the same month, India's imports of Russian crude dropped nearly 17%, sequentially to 1.4 million barrels per day, which is the lowest level in 2024. Now, harsh measures are also pushing both oil prices and freight costs up. Earlier today, oil prices jumped after US announced new sanctions to curb Russian oil supply. Reports say that refiners, tankers, operators and traders across Asia were scrambling to manage the fallout from the latest round of sanctions that impact major importers in India and China too. So far, hundreds of ships and many Russian oil traders managed to escape US sanctions. Now, this is because the Biden administration sought to strike a balance between the case for tighter sanctions and averting a global oil price rally. But in a week from now, President-elect Donald Trump will take office, and the Republican has promised to end the war in Ukraine. Moscow depends on oil exports to not just sustain its economy, but also to fund the ongoing conflict. So will harsher sanctions find a place in Trump's strategy to achieve this goal? Now, for more on this, we have with us international relations and Russian affairs expert, Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, who is joining us live from Brussels. Welcome to Firstpost.
Yes. Good day to you.
Now, Doctor, how will the new US sanctions on Russian oil producers and maritime services affect India's and China's ability to secure stable oil supplies? And what challenges might they face in diversifying their supply chains to countries like the Middle East, Africa, or the Americas?
I appreciate the need to investigate alternative supplies. That is prudent, and it may prove to be essential. However, there's another side to the story. The sanctions that Mr. Biden has just imposed are difficult to remove. They are embedded in American legislation, and it would require an act of Congress for Mr. Trump to overturn these sanctions. However, it is also possible, and I'd say likely, that Mr. Trump will simply not enforce these sanctions. There is no ability of Congress or of any American entity to compel him to enforce these. If he were to go the way through Congress and override or reject the sanctions, then he would have a fight with Congress, and he would be expending his capital, his political capital, for an uncertain result. If he simply doesn't enforce them, then he has no problems, and he keeps on moving with the rest of his political agenda. The actions taken by Biden in the closing days of his administration are vicious, but they also are founded on very poor intelligence. It may sound peculiar to your audience, but the United States CIA and other intelligence agencies that are supplying the White House with the basic information that it uses to draw up tactical and strategic plans for its foreign affairs management, they are faulty. The head of the CIA, Mr. Burns, has been denounced by CIA ex-experts, ex-employees, as lying through his teeth about the nature, the status of the Ukraine war. The plans that Mr. Biden has set down would make sense if this war will proceed to 27 or later, which is what American plans are, as we saw at the meeting in Ramstein last week. However, the Russians will very likely complete the war in the coming months.
Right. Doctor, with the sanctions targeting over 180 tankers and Russia-based maritime insurance providers, how significant is the anticipated rise in oil prices and freight costs likely to be for major consumers like India and China?
I think we have to wait a week or two. I understand that the market reacts and must react to this very significant news that you have just described. The Financial Times, for example, gave a very lengthy and detailed explanation of the different aspects of the sanctions, both those that are intended to curtail Russian production by sanctioning the companies that are based in Russia, that is foreign companies that are acting in Russia to facilitate production, and more importantly, to sanction the ships and the insurers, as you mentioned. The net result could be drastic, but I don't believe that there will be such a net result for the reasons I just mentioned. Mr. Trump wants to end the war.
Right. Absolutely. Doctor, thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost and for your valued insights and analysis.
Well, thanks for having me.
Moving on now to some news from South Asia, where tensions between neighbours India and Bangladesh continue to simmer. In the latest, the two countries are locked in a border face-off. India summoned Bangladesh's Deputy High Commissioner over the border fencing issues. The Bangladeshi envoy was seen leaving from the Indian External Affairs Ministry's office, and this comes as Bangladesh's interim government has sparked a fresh row with India over what is considered a settled border question between the two neighbours. On Sunday, Bangladesh has summoned the Indian High Commissioner over a border fencing issue. The Yunus government is objecting to the barbed wire fencing by India's Border Security Force, or the BSF, signalling that the interim government is reviewing border pacts with India that the Sheikh Hasina government signed earlier. Dhaka said that New Delhi was constructing fences at 5 locations along the border and called it unauthorized. In a stern response countering Bangladesh's unfounded allegations, India called on its neighbour to implement the existing understandings for border management. The two neighbours concluded a land boundary agreement in 2015. The agreement was a revised version of the 1974 pact. It was aimed at resolving a long-standing border dispute between India and Bangladesh. Now, after the meeting in Dhaka, the Indian envoy said that the BSF and the Border Guard Bangladesh, or the BGB, are holding talks regarding fencing the border for security, and that New Delhi expects a cooperative approach. The Indian envoy also said that he discussed New Delhi's commitment to ensure a crime-free border and its bid to address challenges posed by smuggling, movement of criminals and trafficking. Now, earlier, Bangladesh's Home Affairs Ministry said that India had halted the construction of the fence after opposition by Bangladesh's border guards and local residents. India and Bangladesh are set to hold fresh BSF-BGB Director General level talks to discuss the matter at length. Tensions between India and Bangladesh have peaked since the ouster of former Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina in August last year. Months-long student-led uprising led to the collapse of 16-year-long Hasina regime in Bangladesh, after which she fled the country and has been in India since. Her exit and the rise of the interim government under Mohammed Yunus further disrupted the long-standing alignment between the two countries, casting uncertainty over the bilateral relationship. Now, recently, developments in Dhaka, including arrest of the Hindu monk, accusations of sedition and attacks on Hindu minorities, have further ratcheted up tensions, exposing the fragility of the India-Bangladesh ties. And moving on to some updates from the International Space Station. Now, imagine packing for a 7-day trip and ending up being stranded for 9 months. It may sound like a nightmare, but this is what happened with NASA scientists Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore. Their brief 7-day mission has turned into an extended stay at the International Space Station. After being stranded for months, Williams and Wilmore extended a heartfelt plea to return home. In the latest communication with NASA officials, Williams said, "It's just been a joy to be working up there, but eventually she wants to go home."
A great team, and no, it doesn't feel like we're cast away. Yeah, eventually we want to go home because we left our families a little while ago, but we have a lot to do while we're up here, and we've got to get all that stuff done before we go home.
The NASA scientists seem to make peace with life aboard the space station with quirks and humor. Joking about his clothes, he said, It's not like on Earth where you sweat and it gets bad. You can wear things for weeks at a time and it doesn't bother you at all. Now, Williams' earlier pictures had sparked concerns over her health. The NASA scientist seemed to be in poor health with significant muscle loss. Experts pointed out that she looked weak. However, the 59-year-old had allayed the fears, saying, "We are well fed." Williams and Wilmore initially embarked on a 7-day mission aboard Boeing's Starliner. The CST-100 Starliner, carrying both astronauts, lifted off from the Cape Canaveral in Florida on the 5th of June. It was a crucial test before the capsule could receive NASA's approval for routine flights. However, the spacecraft then faced a technical issue with its propulsion system. The Starliner then returned to Earth unmanned. The spacecraft's return was also seen as a crucial test of its maneuvering capabilities for future missions. In August, the NASA chief announced that Williams and Wilmore would not return to Earth until early 2025 and had tapped Boeing's top spaceflight rival SpaceX to bring them home.
NASA has decided that Butch and Sonny will return with Crew 9 next February, and that Starliner will return uncrewed.
The technical issues delayed the astronauts' homecoming to late March of 2025, leaving them stranded at the space station for 9 months. However, their return depends on the successful launch of SpaceX's Crew 10 spacecraft. If the SpaceX Dragon capsule brings the astronauts home successfully, it will prove to be a milestone in the aerospace giant's ambitions. And the fiery presidential campaign in the United States last year saw Donald Trump raise funding through a range of personalized merchandise, from high-top sneakers to silver coins to suit pieces and even Bibles. Americans saw it all. And now the president-elect takes office, the United States could also have Trump vodka. Donald Trump's son, Eric Trump, is reportedly planning to launch a new line of Trump-branded vodka in the United States. One of the proposals to launch the venture includes a deal between Eric Trump wineries and another company that would use the Trump name under an agreement. It is not yet clear whether the deal would be finalized by January the 20th, when Donald Trump will be inaugurated as the US president. But the idea of Trump vodka as a liquor line is not new. Reports say a licensing deal for Trump vodka was launched in 2005. Back then, a teetotaler himself, Donald Trump, reportedly predicted that TNT, that is Trump and tonic, would become the most requested drink in the US. Despite the popular launch, US sales of Trump vodka ended in 2011. The brand was also not on Trump's list of assets submitted to election officials. Over the years, Donald Trump has leveraged his name to promote several products, including books, Bibles, wristwatches, sneakers, and bottled water, among other items. In September last year, Trump unveiled a series of watches valued at $100,000. He also promoted $100 silver coins and 1,000 pairs of limited edition sneakers. Though rarely seen at church, Trump said that the Bible is his favorite book. And around Easter, he began selling the sacred text for $60 online. Perfumes and colognes bearing his name are also in the market. Last month, Trump turned a photo of himself and a smiling Jill Biden seated near each other at the Notre Dame Cathedral reopening into an ad, and he posted it on Truth Social with the caption, "A fragrance your enemies can't resist." Now, more recently, Trump has marketed a cryptocurrency venture aimed at making the US the crypto capital of the world. And that's all we have on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching. Be sure to stay tuned to Firstpost.
From breaking news to the day's biggest controversies, shedding light on the world's top headlines, detailed analysis on the stories that matter the most to you. Catch it all on Spotlight at 6 p.m. India time and 12:30 GMT. only on First Post.